Chapter 11, page 50. A boy named Christopher has a dream. For most people before the 15th century, Europe was a place of superstition and poverty. For most, it was a place of war and disease. Then things began to change. In Italy, poets and painters and sculptors began creating new works of art. It was called a Renaissance, a time of rebirth. Ideas seemed to be in the air, and inventions, too, like the compass. Actually, the compass had been around for thousands of years. The ancient Chinese discovered that a magnet swinging freely will always point north. Arabs brought that knowledge to Europe, but early compasses were not always reliable. In the 15th century, the years beginning with 14, the compass was improved. It could now be depended upon at sea. Having a little needle that always pointed north meant new worlds could be discovered. Imagine you're in a small ship in a great ocean. You can't see land, just water in every direction. If you don't have a compass, how do you know which way to get home? Top of page 51. If you know the stars, and most good sailors do, you can wait until nighttime and let the stars guide you. But suppose, just suppose, it's cloudy and stormy. No stars can be seen. Maybe it's cloudy for a week. Your little ship can't carry much food. You might sail in the wrong direction and run out of food before you find your way back, if you get back. Storms at sea are tough to survive, all of which explains why ships stayed close to home before the compass was perfected. In the 15th century, many Europeans wanted to sail to China and Japan and India because those lands were thought to be the world's most advanced civilizations and because they held gold and jewels and spices. Most Europeans were wild to find a way to reach the Indies. Indies was a catch-all word for all the lands of East Asia, and mostly because of a book. The book was by Marco Polo, and it told of his trip to China back in the 13th century. It told of golden palaces and jewels and wonders beyond imagining. Marco Polo had done some exaggerating. Still, a few traders had been to China and brought back silk and spices and tales of splendid cities. Whoever could find a fast, safe way to get to the Orient, another word for East Asia, would become rich and famous. Everyone agreed about that. But the only way to get there was by land, through Turkey and the Middle East. That route had become dangerous. Rival Islamic empires were fighting for control of that region. In addition, at the top page 52, there were thieves who preyed on merchant caravans. That doesn't mean they got on their knees to God. If you want to say that, you spell it prayed, P-R-A-Y-E-D. If you spell it with an E, it means they robbed the caravans. Portugal's Prince Henry, who was fascinated with sailing and map-making, was determined to have his sailors get to Cathay, China, by sailing around Africa, and finally the Portuguese did it. But one man dreamed of reaching China and the Indies by another, even faster route. His name was Christopher Columbus. When Christopher Columbus was a boy, he had two dreams. One was to go to sea, the other was to get to China. When he grew up, he thought he had done both. Columbus was born in Genoa, an Italian city on the Mediterranean Sea. Genoa was prosperous because of the sea trade, and many Genoese boys wanted to be sailors. Columbus became one of the best the world has ever known. Columbus knew about China because he had read Marco Polo's book. He had read it carefully. His copy of the book is full of notes. We're at the top of page 53. Most people in the 15th century couldn't read. That meant they were ignorant of many things. A few believed the world was flat. They thought if you sailed too far, you'd fall off the edge. But people who could read, like Columbus, knew that wasn't so. Scientists had proof that the world was round, and they told about it in books. There was a problem, though. No one was quite sure how big the world was. So no one knew how far you would have to sail to go around it. One way to try and figure that out was by measuring lines of longitude and latitude. Longitude and latitude are very useful lines. We're on the 4th paragraph down. They are drawn on maps to help measure the Earth. The lines that run horizontally across the globe show latitude. The vertical lines up and down show longitude. To tell where you are on Earth, you need two numbers, a latitude and a longitude. Washington, D.C. is at about 39 degrees north latitude by 77 degrees west longitude. Lines of latitude are also called parallels. Lines of longitude are also called meridians. If you know longitude and latitude, you can always tell where you are, on land or sea. Latitude is easy to figure out if you can read the stars, or if you measure the angle of the sun at noon with an instrument called a sextant. But longitude isn't easy, especially on a ship. You need to know exactly how far you have traveled from where you started. You probably know the math. Distance equals speed multiplied by the time taken. A seaman could make a crude guess at the ship's speed by watching its hull cutting through the water. But to calculate exactly the time you've taken, you need a really accurate clock that keeps very good time. To tell time in the 15th century, ships had hourglasses filled with sand, which you turned over every half hour when the sand ran out. If a sailor who turned over the hourglass dozed off, well, you can see how easy it was to make mistakes. So ships at sea hardly ever knew exactly where they were. That problem wasn't solved until the 18th century, when very good clocks began to be made. Top of page 54. Columbus did not worry. He knew Spain and Japan were on the same lines of latitude. So if he could just stick with it, he figured he'd land in Japan. And he would have if the American continent hadn't gotten in the way. Columbus figured the Earth was much smaller than it is. He had also figured that Cathay was much larger than it is. Now, as you know, people who could read knew the world was round. They understood that if you went west from Europe, you would finally get to Asia. But no one wanted to try going that way. It seemed too dangerous and too far. Most people believed there were ferocious monsters in the deep waters. Every sailor knew the dangers of storms at sea. Because Columbus believed the earth was small and because he was a superb sailor, he thought he could make it to Cathay. So he went to Portugal to ask for help. The Portuguese were world leaders in exploration and navigation, but the Portuguese weren't willing to take the risk. They turned Columbus down. So did almost everyone else. Columbus took his ideas to one person after another. Each one said sorry, except King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, who said perhaps. Maybe they were just being polite, because they seemed to forget all about Columbus. Years passed. He asked them again. This time they said no. One thing you can say for Columbus, he never gave up. He was on his way to see the King of France when a messenger called him back to Spain. Finally, Ferdinand and Isabella had agreed to help him. They gave him 3 small ships and some sailors, and sent him in search of China and Japan.